Welcome back, guys. We have finished the Super Bowl and we fell just short, losing to the Chiefs. But now is our chance to start all over again and rebuild our way back. Before we get started, remember to like, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications down below, and let's get straight into discussing how Super Bowl 58 went down. This was a very close game till the very end, but after 4 quarters, we would be bested by Kansas City by a score of 27-24. So let's go through the story of this game. We would start by going 3 and out, but it was not due to a lack of effort from our own Kyler Murray. Despite this slow start, he did over the course of the day put together a 200-yard passing day with just 12 throws, and he even found the end zone twice as well. So we would then punt the ball back, and on the very first play, it would be our own Bryce Huff who would win inside and get to Mahomes for the sack. And that would just be the start of the dominance he would put on display. He would find himself in the backfield on 4 other occasions and end up finishing the day with 2.5 sacks, which we'll detail later. And speaking of Patrick Mahomes, he himself had a phenomenal day slinging the ball around as he made so many incredible throws, which would get him over 350 through the air and would also have him toss in 3 scores. And the first of those would come at the end of this very drive, as with some great pocket movement, he would find his rookie receiver Rashee Rice for the first points of this game. This was a picture-perfect find, and this would be his best moment as he would bring in 5 more balls to total 73 on the day. Then we would get very run-heavy, and surprisingly, it would be James Conner who would be the guy to step up. He only touched it 7 times, but he would end up averaging over 5 yards a carry. And they needed this production as Tyson Williams struggled to get going early on in this one. There were just no holes opening up for him early, but as the game went on, he would get 15 carries for 50 plus yards, and that would be a very solid contribution for him. We would drive all the way down to the red zone, and we set up for a 4th and 1, but we ran out of time on the play clock, causing a delay of game, and we would instead send out the 39-year-old Matt Prater to knock through the 35-yard field goal. The Chief offense would get the ball back, and the man who would stand out this time would be Kadarius Toney. We saw his impact in their previous games this playoff run, and today he would not only bring in so many tough grabs, but he would cap off this drive by just reaching across the goal line to put his team up by 2 scores. But then, just 2 plays later, our superstar Hollywood Brown would make his presence felt, as he would beat his matchup off the line, turn on the burners, and he would end up bringing in the deep bomb to secure the 76-yard touchdown reception. Then we would find ourselves in the second quarter, and our defense would start to step up, and a lot of that would come from the duo of Jalen Thompson and Marco Wilson. As a pair, they would combine for 23 tackles, with about half of them being solo efforts, and they continued to make plays in coverage, whether it was punching the ball out or placing the hit to dislodge it. But around that time, KC would be forced to deal with injuries, as they would end up losing their left tackle Donovan Smith, and a few plays later they would also lose their Pro Bowl left guard Joe Thuney, and that left side of their line would start to look really weak. And we would expose that as Kansas City's drive would come to an end when Dennis Gardeck would win off that left side. He would get to Mahomes to place the hit, and it would cause a fumble, but the Chiefs would end up jumping back on it to at least allow them to punt it away. We would end up trading a few punts, but then as we neared halftime, we would send out Hulk to boot it back to the Chiefs, and Richie James would return this one, but he would get absolutely rocked by an incoming Chris Barnes with a hit that would force yet another fumble, and this time we would get on the loose ball to recover, and that would save our failed drive. We would then be able to run the clock all the way down to 15 seconds, and with a simple dump off, we would get our own Trey McBride into the end zone to bring our deficit to 4. And that would be the reward for a great day from him, which would end up being a 6-catch effort, which would bring him just under the 70-yard mark. But KC did not want to settle, and they tried to set up for a Hail Mary try, but it would be the rookie, Garrett Williams, who would thwart those plans as he would cut off a throw intended for Kelsey, and he would end up taking it 40 yards down the field to secure the pick 6 touchdown, which would give us our first lead of the game as the clock would hit 0 to go to the halftime break. We would then begin the second half of action, and the Chiefs would drain a ton of clock on the initial drive as they would focus on pounding the rock with Isaiah Pacheco. He is by no means the focal point of this offense, but he would make the most of his carries with some great vision and strength, and he would end up finishing with just under 60 on the ground. But this drive would not end as they hoped, as they would find themselves just outside the red zone, and it would be our defensive rookie of the year, BJ Ojulari, who would display some blazing speed, which would have him meet Huff at the quarterback, where they would drop Mahomes once again for a sack to force them to settle for a field goal. We would then take our own drive all the way down to the 32. We would set up with Prater for the field goal, but we would run the fake, which would have Prater throw to McBride, and we could not complete the pass, resulting in a turnover on downs. Taking a quick moment, we need to talk about Budda Baker. He had an incredible day, and while he doesn't always light up the stat sheet with his position, he broke up so many passes and was a key reason why we were able to stay in this game. But we would then enter the fourth quarter, and as Casey was back in the red zone, it would yet again be Bryce Huff, who would end up being the one to get to Mahomes to drop him for the sack for his third time. But this is when Mahomes' biggest weapon, Travis Kelce, would make his mark. Throughout the entire battle, he was a dynamic route runner, finding the open space, bringing in tough grabs all over, and he would end up finishing with 12 grabs for a whopping 168 receiving yards on the day, and he would end up completely erasing the lost yardage on the sack. And just 3 plays after that, it would once more be Kadarius Toney who would bring in the receiving touchdown after he ate a big hit from Marco Wilson, but he would hold on, securing the game-tying touchdown for his team. We would then move into the depths of the fourth quarter, and both defensive units would step up, making massive stands, forcing multiple 3-and-outs, knowing the Super Bowl was on the line. We would get down to about 5 minutes remaining, and it would be Kelce who would once again come away with another massive reception to get them just outside field goal range. Then 2 plays later, Huff, with an incredible effort, would end up batting down a Mahomes throw at the line, and the very next play would be game-defining as Mahomes would throw an interception the way of Isaiah Simmons with a pure instinct play in which he would abandon Kelce in coverage and find his way in the path of the ball to come away with the big takeaway. We would then get the chance to form a game-winning drive, and after they forced 4th down near midfield, we decided we didn't want to leave it up to the Chief offense to decide this game. So we went for it on 4th and 5, and despite a lot of contact across the middle, there would be no pass interference call on the incompletion, meaning we would suffer our second turnover on downs of the game. Casey would then run the ball a few times, and they would then trot out Harrison Butker for another field goal try, this time to take the lead with under a minute remaining, and he nails it from 40 yards out to take the 3-point advantage. So then we would get one last shot where we ended up dumping it off to Williams, who they kept inbounds, meaning we couldn't stop the clock. So we ran back to the line, and with time expiring, we would throw up the deep ball for Wilson and would fall incomplete, meaning that the Kansas City Chiefs were officially back-to-back Super Bowl champions. And we then watched them hoist the Lombardi Trophy. And your Super Bowl MVP has been named Patrick Mahomes, and genuinely, I think Travis Kelce got robbed. Without him, I don't think they win this game. Before we went any further, I thought it would be best to set some goals to accomplish for this offseason. First off, we need to upgrade this coaching staff, who went this entire year with 2 rookie coordinators on offense and defense. And while I believe they will grow into incredible coaches, to win now, we need an experienced staff. Next, we need to improve our run defense. It seemed like we were dominated on the ground every time we matched up against a run-heavy team, and facing McCaffrey 2 times a year makes it clear we need to shore that up. After that, we need to decide what to do with Isaiah Simmons. The Super Bowl was his last game under contract with us, and he has made it clear that he is not interested in returning to us in free agency. So do we end up letting him walk, or do we give him the franchise tag and see if we can right the ship after one more season? And lastly, we need to capitalize on our success this year and add some ring-chasing talent. There are plenty of amazing players who have never touched a ring, and if we can get them possibly at a discount to give them a shot at one before their careers are over, it would be huge for both them and us. We then began our offseason by checking out the staff moves from around the league. We already know all of the head coach firings thus far, but there are still some interesting developments to see, like how Chicago has cleared shot by also firing both coordinators. Then Cincinnati would decide to let go of their young defensive coordinator in Ian Alexander, and then both the Bucs and the Chargers would let go of their offensive coordinators. A ton of mass change would have happened across the NFC as Atlanta, Washington, and Minnesota would all send home their coaching trio. Houston would drop both of their young coordinators, and for the AFC, it would be New England dropping both coordinators as well, with the Packers and the Jets dropping their OCs and DCs respectively. We then moved to the playoff team casualties, and after we took down the 49ers, they ended up letting go defensive coordinator Sammy Wagner. After losing to the Chiefs again, it looks like Buffalo's Sean McDermott let go of both of his coordinators. Then the Seattle team we defeated in the divisional round would let their OC step away, and Philly's defensive coordinator, who gave up 45 against us in the NFC Championship, was served his papers as well. And we heard about it earlier, but the Raiders offensive coordinator Rod Starling will be moving on to the Seahawks to replace the retiring Pete Carroll as head coach. So we decided to add to the craziness as we released both our offensive coordinator Marvin Fowler and our defensive coordinator John Graham. But before we hopped into the coach market, we ended up upgrading the first tier of hands-on offense, which makes OC talents cost 10% less. We then went into the coach market and we decided to hire the former Bear OC, Glenn Powers, who runs a West Coast spread scheme and has a ton of talents focused on maximizing Kyler Murray's throwing ability. And on defense, we decided to go with the former Buffalo DC Lewis Fox, who runs a 4-3 quarter scheme, and he has a lot of talents to complement safeties, which we like to use for a lot of different things. And to keep realism, we will also be changing our schemes and playbooks to match our new signings. And with the hiring bonuses we received from that, we went right back to our head coach talent tree, and we filled out the staff modifications branch by purchasing the first tier of Not All Is Lost, which gives us a 10% talent refund when replacing an OC, and Welcoming Gift, which improves the hiring bonus when signing a new OC. And then we had enough points to pick up all 3 tiers of after-school tutoring, meaning we can now have 6 focus players for training every single week. We then moved over to look at our season stats, and we have to commend what veteran QB Colt McCoy was able to do for us. He stepped up to a role where he knew as soon as Murray was healthy, he had no shot of playing, and he made the most of it as he threw for just under 3,000 yards and 26 touchdowns in a little over 12 games this year. In the running game, we shared a lot of carries between our trio due to injuries and breakouts, but they ended up combining for over 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns. In the receiving game, yards-wise, we were led by Hollywood Brown, who was our only man to cross 1,000 yards, and on 49 receptions is just insane. And for touchdowns, Trey McBride was near the top of the league with 12 on the year. On the offensive line, we learned that Kelvin Beachum just could not perform at a starter level anymore, as he gave up 11 sacks on the year, and he would be benched after just as many games. But a very solid sign, our rookie tackle, Paris Johnson, only gave up 2 sacks the entire season, which is very hard considering all the impressive edge rushers that attacked that side of the line. On defense, our best overall player was Zaven Collins, who led us in both overall tackles and was 3rd in TFLs. A very impressive note is that rookie corner Garrett Williams totaled over 100 tackles as a slot corner, which is insanity. And while we struggled against the run, we were dominant against the pass, finishing with 55 sacks and 19 interceptions as a team. And on special teams, Matt Prater in possibly his final year was incredible, as he was dialed in from any range as he went 8 for 10 from 50 plus yards out. Then we moved on to all the retirements across the league, and there are a lot of them on here, but let's pick out the notable ones. To start, Pittsburgh's Cameron Hayward decides to call it quits, ending his 13-year career, and he will be remembered for a long time in the Steel City. 2 more 13-year careers will end New Orleans, and this defense will be tough to rebuild as they are losing middle linebacker Demario Davis and defensive end Cameron Jordan, and time will tell if the latter eventually is named a Hall of Famer. Another potential Hall of Famer from the Raiders calls it quits as defensive tackle Ndamukong Suh ends his career, which took him to 6 different organizations. Green Bay will be having a brand new special teams unit as Brett Maher ends his 6-year career, and the former All-Pro punter Andy Lee also rides off into the sunset. We get some help in the division as after finishing his 14th season, which earned him Pro Bowl honors, Trent Williams announces his retirement. Down in Atlanta, defensive end Calais Campbell ends one of the longest tenures in the league at 16 years. After being benched before the NFC Championship, Brandon Graham hangs up his cleats, and unfortunately for us, the future Hall of Famer Jason Kelce also announces the end of his career, and he was a potential target for us in free agency if he didn't retire. The brand new single-season sack record holder Von Miller ends his star-studded career after 13 seasons. And for us, Xavier Rhodes, after one of the best seasons of his career, decides to call it quits, and he did more than we ever could have asked of him. After that, We then got the next version of the mock draft, and keep in mind we have 2 picks, as a year ago Houston sent us their first this year to move up, and it paid off for us as they have secured us the number 1 overall pick, and with it we are projected to take linebacker Andrew Barker out of UCLA. At 9, it looks like the Rams are set to take Matthew Stafford's replacement in Oklahoma's Curtis Atkins. And after hearing the retirement news, San Francisco are projected to take Trent Williams' replacement at 19 with Notre Dame's Dexter McIntyre. Seattle looks set to add some pass rush, as at 27, they look to be taking the defensive end out of Colorado, Charles Pechette. Our second pick of the first round sits at 31, and we look set to take center Chris Sara out of Wisconsin to shore up our interior O-line. And the Super Bowl champion Chiefs look to also beef up their line, taking tackle Malachi Tate out of Clemson with the 32nd pick. Following this, it was time to make some final contract negotiations. And to start, we are most definitely giving Zaven Collins the 5th-year option, and that will come into effect this season after next. We then withdrew offers from Chris Barnes, Josh Jones, Rashad Fenton, and Rashard Lawrence. Both Leki Fotu and Roy Lopez had a ton of interest in us, so we started by offering Lopez a 2-year, $7.6 million deal, earning $3.6 million a year in salary, and he said he would rather test free agency. So we then moved over to Fotu, and we offered him a 1-year deal worth $4.4 million, earning $2 million in salary, and he also elected to become a free agent. We also withdrew the offer on Jonathan Ledbetter, LJ Collier, Juju Hughes, Jesse Lukita, Antonio Hamilton, Corey Clement, Carlos Watkins, Andre Chachere, Noah Togegi, Mike Pennell, David Blau, and Colt McCoy. We then made an easy deal bringing back punter Matt Hawk on a 1-year, $1.7 million deal. Then we get to our 29-year-old left guard Elijah Wilkinson. We thought about this one, and with him having a good year and his position not really being an upgrade focus, we decided to set him an offer for 2 years, $8.2 million, earning $5.4 million a year in salary, and he said this is exactly the offer he was hoping to get, and next season will be great. And our last decision to make, we're going to hit Isaiah Simmons with the franchise tag. This is a much cheaper deal than he was looking for, and we can squeeze in the funds for 1 year if we get to keep that dynamic ability, and we can figure out his situation later. We then jumped over to the news headlines following the league's last-minute cap decisions, and it looks like the top free agent will end up being Tampa Bay's Pro Bowl safety, Antoine Winfield, and he will be a massive piece for someone. Then you saw the side of the business where teams have decided to save their cap by cutting big deals, such as for the Raiders that let go Chandler Jones after just his 2nd year with them. The Chargers seem to also be struggling with the cap, as they let go Mike Williams after spending his first 7 seasons with LA, and another big cut they had to make. Legendary pass rusher Khalil Mack was also cut, and while he may be on the twilight of his career, it may not be done just yet. We then heard of some additional retirements, and this one hits home as the former All-Pro for Arizona and Patrick Peterson calls it quits after 13 years. Aaron Rodgers, in a stunning turn of events, has also announced his retirement after 19 years, and now it really feels like everything the Jets gave up to get him wasn't worth it, as they lost him after just 1 season. We also lose more players. Our first isn't our biggest loss, as the guy we benched in Kelvin Beachum hangs him up, but a much bigger one. Our veteran kicker Matt Prater calls it quits as he turns 40, and he has earned it. So we could then hop into free agency with just under $11 million to play with, but there is a ton of star power on the market, such as veteran tackle Tyron Smith and middle linebacker Bobby Wagner. So we took some time to try and decide who we wanted to go big for, and then we saw how much interest Khalil Mack had in us, with his biggest motivation being the Super Bowl chase. We looked over some salaries quickly to see if there was any extra cap space to correct, so we went into negotiations, and based off a bunch of different factors such as our limited cap, his high interest, and no competing teams, we did not offer him the $14.2 million he expected. We instead gave him a 1-year deal worth $10.9 million, making $5.2 million in salary, and it wasn't the greatest offer, but again, there is no competition yet. That would end up using all of our cap, so we would go through our first evaluation period, and he did not accept it yet. We went through our second evaluation, and still no decision. But we are also the only team offering. We used our final evaluation of the stage 1 of free agency, And this competition quickly gets hot as 7 teams get in the race, but it looks like these other contenders undercut him even more, leaving us still in the lead. So we then reviewed some of the big signings as Winfield signed a 4-year $61.5 million deal with Detroit. Tyron Smith is now a Titan after signing a 1-year $17.9 million deal. Mike Williams is now a Lion, and it looks like Bobby Wagner is deciding to play out what could be his final season in Chicago. And lastly, the 33-year-old Micah Hyde can now call himself a Las Vegas Raider. Before advancing, we did get some new draft prospect news stories following the combine. It looks like running back Adrian Queen out of Alabama is one of the fastest guys this year, while wide receiver Dean McClendon seems to have put up a very poor 40 time. We then advanced to stage 2 of free agency, and Khalil Mack has signed with us. He may not be the elite player he used to be, but he will be one of the better edge rushing additions, and he can also help in stopping the run. I then took the time to scout out the entire draft class, and then we advanced through the remainder of free agency, and it was time to assign our 3 private workouts. And we decided to select corner Dion Huffman out of Oregon, D-tackle Michael Allison also out of Oregon, and offensive tackle Gary Fordham out of Wisconsin. We then arrived at the NFL draft, and we would be starting the action with the number 1 pick. But before we get started, I think it's important, now that we have gone through the offseason process, to identify what positions we need to target in this draft. First and foremost, we need to address defensive tackle. We need to find ourselves a reliable guy to plug up the middle of the field and stop the run. Next, we need to find a center and an offensive tackle. Our guards were the best part of our line, but we found very quickly last year that Kelvin Beachum was not able to start any longer, and the center position may have been our weakest on the entire roster. After that, we need to address both corner and running back. While our rushing attack worked very well last year, we had to let go of Clement as he hit that running back ceiling, and Connor was extremely injury prone as well. And while Marco was a lockdown corner and Williams played very well in the slot, we need to establish a third corner to replace the retiring Rhodes. And maybe we also find ourselves some coverage linebacker help as well. But the very last need of ours is to get a kicker to replace the departing Matt Prater. So we now went to focus on the draft, and we started in a very interesting position. We do have the number 1 pick, but we also have a franchise quarterback in Kyler Murray, and we knew that pole position would have a ton of value for teams looking to acquire their own QB1. So we began to field offers, and we got some very impressive ones from Chicago, Buffalo, Houston, Seattle, Vegas, New England, Detroit, Jacksonville, San Fran, Philly, and even Indianapolis. We knew the main guy we wanted to bring in was defensive tackle Michael Allison. He had the best talent for a position we needed, so we checked out the top needs of each team to make sure our guy wouldn't get swiped. We started with the Vikings at 2, and we were all clear there. Then we went to the Falcons at 3, and defensive tackle was their number 2 need right behind quarterback. So in my mind, the thought was if whoever we trade with takes the QB they want, they maybe would just take Allison at 3 instead. So we would end up trading with the Vikings, which would officially end up being Minnesota acquiring the number 1 overall pick in exchange for the number 2 pick, their 2nd rounder, 5th rounder, and 6th rounder next year, and their 2nd rounder 2 years from now. And with the trade complete, Minnesota would decide to take defensive end Donovan Clay out of LSU. So they do not take QB, choosing to try and go for it with Kirk Cousins again. And that would leave us at 2. And we were not playing around anymore, as we took defensive tackle Michael Allison out of Oregon. And while he is only a normal dev, he should be a more solidified talent at 23 years old with a ton of strength, and he should be ready to play day 1. We then moved along, and right behind us at number 3, the Falcons would take offensive tackle Luke Alexander, and that led us to looking over our draft board as we knew tackle was one of our target positions. While there was a lot of first-round talent at that position, we knew the guy we wanted to take was the tackle Gary Fordham out of Wisconsin, and with 3 guys projected ahead of him, we could sit back and relax for a moment. So we moved to the next pick, and Houston would take another tackle in Brian Mackey. Pittsburgh would take the 3rd straight tackle in Sam Michaels, and now we are starting to have a run on offensive tackles. So we went back to checking out team needs for the next few teams to select. The Giants were next up, and they had a lot of other ways to go. Same for the pick 7 Saints, but then we saw the Pats' top need at this point was offensive tackle. So we kept that in mind and moved along. New York would select Tremont Hull, wide receiver out of Miami, and we would consider the idea of trading back up in the top of the first round to leapfrog New England. But the demand from New Orleans was so high, we decided to sit tight, and it made sense as they would select their quarterback of the future, Rashad Pickett, out of South Carolina, as they look to fill the void that has been left ever since Drew Brees retired. We then hit the 9th pick, and New England would take a tackle, but it would be Emmett Chamberlain out of Oregon State. So we would then go back to checking team needs, with the next few picks going to the Rams, the Commanders, the Bears, and the Packers. We knew LA's focus would be QB, as every mock draft all year has pushed for them to take Matthew Stafford's replacement. Washington isn't set on tackle. Chicago was in the same boat, but Green Bay had tackle as their second biggest need. So we advanced to the next pick, and our division rivals did take a new QB in Curtis Atkins out of Oklahoma, so we will be seeing his career transpire. But then we knew we had to make a splash. If we want to stay competitive and get ourselves back to the Super Bowl, we need to draft guys who can make a difference immediately. So we need our guy. With that, we got into talks with Chicago to figure out what they would want for the pick. They started with saying Budda Baker, which was not happening. And then they wanted a multitude of picks. So I started to think about who could be expendable, and I kept coming back to Isaiah Simmons. We very nearly lost him this offseason if it wasn't for the franchise tag, and he is going to want a big deal that I'm not sure we will be willing or able to give him. So we started to go back and forth when we came down to this. We would offer up Isaiah Simmons, the 31st pick, the 111th pick, and both a second rounder next year and the year after, in exchange for that 11th overall pick and 24-year-old corner Tyreek Stevenson. And they would accept. Now, this was a great deal for both sides, not just for the draft pick's sake, but for Chicago. They get the chance to add in a highly flexible defensive star in Isaiah Simmons, who they can afford to give the big-time extension to keep him around, making them a favorite for the NFC North. And for us, we get the chance to add another young corner to our secondary where he can step right in and replace Rhodes. And it's the best we could have got, as the cornerback class this year was just not impressive. And then with that new pick, we would of course select offensive tackle Gary Fordham, and he would be a hidden development player, and we are starting to put together a very solid line with Wilkinson and Hernandez re-signed, Johnson still on one end of the line, and now Fordham on the other. After that, it was time to settle in a bit, so we'll go through the rest of the first round, and after, we'll cover our rivals and any picks that may affect us. At 12, Green Bay takes defensive end Zeke Carrington. At 13, Tampa Bay takes quarterback Charles Morgan. At 14, LA takes defensive tackle Antonio Silvers. At 15, New York takes receiver Jonathan Hardison. At 16, Denver takes defensive end Jerome Grigsby. At 17, Jacksonville takes receiver Carlos Esparza. At 18, Cincinnati takes tight end Tremont Baker. Then at 19, our biggest division rival in the Niners take offensive tackle Dexter McIntyre out of Notre Dame, and they hope he can fill the void left by Trent Williams. Then at 20, Buffalo takes safety Josh Hogan. At 21, Chicago takes outside linebacker Demarius Beard. At 22, Miami takes defensive tackle Jonathan Banks. At 23, Detroit takes offensive tackle Larry Forney. At 24, Indianapolis takes defensive end Charles Pachette. At 25, Tennessee takes defensive end Aries Bates. At 26, Las Vegas takes potential Josh Jacobs replacement in Tony Allen. And under new leadership, the Seahawks select guard Jaden Williams out of USF. At 28, Dallas takes tackle Malachi Tate. At 29, Philly takes running back Trevante Forbes. At 30, Baltimore takes corner Terrell Rosenthal with what was formerly our pick. Chicago takes safety Warren Peters. And with the last pick of the first round, Kansas City selects safety Gordon Douglas. We then moved through the second round, and the Rams would add receiver Nigel Judge out of Purdue to give Atkins another weapon to target. San Francisco would add a receiver as well in Garrison Drayton as they look to add even further to all of their offensive weapons. And then Seattle would add tight end Nick Ware out of Florida, still focusing on their offense. We then reached our second round pick, and with center being another focus position for us, we had two we liked, so we decided to go with Chris Sara out of Wisconsin. and he was yet another hidden dev player. And at 21 years old, he could become truly special. And two of our best picks of the day, me and Sarah and Fordham, will move from teammates at Wisconsin to teammates in Arizona. KC gets the following pick, and with it, they take defensive tackle George Parks. And then we were right back on the clock with the first pick of the third round, and with the trade sending away Simmons, who mostly played a linebacker role last year, we took a shot on middle linebacker Bryce Harris, and he was a normal dev. But hopefully he can find some success alongside Collins. For the third round, the Rams would take cornerback Justin Cheeks, the Seahawks would take outside linebacker Roman Richardson, and the Niners would take another outside linebacker in Tyrone Bonds. We would then find ourselves back on the clock near the end of the third round, and we would select halfback Sean Jones out of Butler, and he would also have normal development. However, if he does well, we could find a place for him, and he's also still young at 21. Then 6 picks later, we were back up, and we decided to ensure we could run our 3 tight end sets effectively, as we chose to select Dan Rafano out of Florida, who is another normal dev, but he is such a great athlete that he should be able to make up for some skill deficiencies. We then began to fast forward through the later rounds, so at the end of the 4th, we decided to take another running back in Mark Bradford out of Eastern Washington, who is another normal dev, but another shot at standing out. We had 2 picks at the end of the 5th round, so at the first, we took a guard in Will Wayne, who wasn't our greatest pick by any means, and then our next was another defensive tackle in Lonnie Johnson. He's very similar to our very first pick of the draft in Allison, as they are both normal dev D tackles at 23 years old. And then, with no pick in the 6th round, we went all the way to the 2nd to the last pick, and with it, we took kicker Nate Garfield, a 21-year-old out of North Dakota State. With the draft coming to an end, we then went to review our draft picks, and I think we did a pretty solid job, coming away with 4 players with 70 plus overall and multiple guys who will get playing time in one way or another. For San Fran, their first round tackle and third round linebacker were nice picks, but nothing else was very notable. The Rams' first 2 offensive selections seem to be very big ones, and like I said before, we will be ready to meet their new quarterback in Curtis Atkins very, very soon. The Seahawks got a stellar talent in the guard they picked up at the end of the first round, and they also got a steal in the 4th round with their defensive end. Kansas City had a solid draft as well, coming with 4 of their own players with at least 70 overall. And along with our trade with them, Chicago also had a great draft, bringing in a ton of defensive contributors, which we probably will be forced to take on at some point soon. We then received our 2024 NFL season schedule, and we start with the preseason, with us first taking on the Patriots, who are trying to scrape out of the bottom of the AFC East. Then we get a Super Bowl rematch against the Chiefs, and lastly, we will return home to take on the Bengals, and that is a very nice spread of talents to get some solid evaluations on our preseason battles. Then we got to the regular season, and we start on the road heading into Miami to take on the high-powered Dolphin offense. Then in week 2, we have a Sunday night football clash with the top 2 teams of the NFC as we take on the Cowboys that blew us out around the same time last year, and it gets no easier as 1 week later, we then get the real rematch of the Super Bowl as we go into Arrowhead to take on Patrick Mahomes. We then get a 3-game stretch of home games, in which we start by taking on the Minnesota Vikings, and then we finish our AFC East gauntlet as we take on the Bills and the Pats once more, and then we head into the Meadowlands to take on the Jets for Monday Night Football. We then get a matchup of 2 of the youngest units in the NFL as we return home to take on the Packers. And then before we get to our Week 12 bye, we finally open up our division action with a trio of battles as we welcome the 49ers, then we go to Seattle to test their new regime, and we very quickly get a rematch as we head to San Fran for yet another Monday Night Football battle. Then after the bye, our season keeps getting interesting as we will get to take on Isaiah Simmons as we head into Chicago to take on the Bears. And then we have a short week as we fly down to Los Angeles to take on the Rams and their new quarterback, Curtis Atkins. And then we have a final stretch of the year which will seemingly have a lot of impact to playoff standings. Week 15 has us welcome the Seahawks into our house, and then we might define the future of our opponents in 2 straight weeks as we go on the road to first take on the Panthers in Charlotte and then the Lions in Detroit. And both of these teams were in highly competitive divisions, which they were only able to lock down in the final week of the season. And then our season finale comes at home against the Rams once again. And we then identified our players of focus for this upcoming season. And it of course started with Kyler Murray. He was phenomenal last season, but that was in less than half of the regular season. We need to see him take another step as a passer and show consistency for the entire season. And after that, we have Clayton Tune. We now have an opening at backup QB as we moved on from Colt McCoy, who severely regressed, and the most likely candidate is Tune. We used a 5th round pick on him in the previous draft, but after having a poor preseason a year ago, we decided to put him on the practice squad and allow him to develop there. We will obviously find him competition, but it is very important to have a great backup signal caller with Murray's injury concerns. At running back, Tyson Williams has a lot to prove. He really broke out in the second half of the year, and we hope we can see him continue that production as our number 1 back to start the season. And those opportunities came from James Conner's fragility. While he's such a great runner when he's healthy like he displayed in the Super Bowl, he is only getting older, and with 2 rookie backs behind him, he needs a good preseason to solidify his spot in the rotation. More playmaking focus, I think Hollywood Brown has an interesting situation. He had an incredible season last year, becoming a superstar, landing his big extension, and getting himself 1,000 receiving yards on less than 50 catches. So the question will be if we can find more ways to utilize him. Do we keep him outside? Do we move him into the slot? There are a lot of options to consider. Our other biggest receiving threat is, of course, Trey McBride. He did amazing his first year as the starting tight end, bringing in double-digit touchdowns, and he found himself near the top of the league in that category. And we want to see if we can keep that dominance going in his 3rd year. On the defensive side, one of our most important guys to watch is the number 2 overall pick, Michael Allison. We will probably play a bit more traditional defense involving the D tackle this year, as we hope to play better against the run, and he will have a ton of expectations to live up to with such a high draft pick. But the guy we have all of our trust in is, of course, B.J. Ojulari. Coming off his Defensive Rookie of the Year season, we need to see him continue to use that explosive speed to cause havoc for opposing teams and continue to be a difference maker for us. Another player we hope follows up a great rookie year is corner Garrett Williams. He played almost the entire year in the slot, and with the departure of Xavier Rhodes, he may very well be asked to expand to the outside, and it'll be interesting to see how he does in that position. But the other big question mark from that position group is, of course, our draft day trade acquisition, Tyreek Stevenson. He's another young developing star, but if he can define a role in our secondary with great play, he could change a lot of things for how we approach the defensive side of the ball this year. And our final question is, of course, rookie kicker Nate Garfield. We relied a lot on Matt Prater last year as he was able to nail a ton of long distance kicks for us, but I don't think Garfield has that in him just yet. So we will have to see how he does throughout the preseason and see if we are willing to let him handle the kicking duties or if we need to look into free agency for an answer. But with that, we have discussed everything we have needed to for the offseason. If you guys enjoyed, remember to like, comment, subscribe, turn those notifications down below, and we will add some backups for preseason competition through free agency. And then I will see you all for the start of our 2nd preseason as we welcome the New England Patriots.